Well, a very warm welcome to our latest Generation podcast. For those of you who are watching in video, an apology. I've broken all the rules. I should not have worn a blue jumper against a blue chair. So all you RT continuity people, please relax. This is just a Generation podcast. We are not hyper professional, but my lack of professionalism has been made up by our guest today. Our guest today is Saško Nezamutdinov. I'm not sure if I've pronounced that correctly. Sasko, very warm welcome to Generation.
Thank you for having me.
Hello. Great. Now, Sasko, can you just tell our listeners, many of them will know who you are, others won't, just tell us what you're doing just now.
Right. So I am a minister in training, Presbyterian minister in training, hopefully for the last just a couple of months. Just graduated from seminary, got my MDiv, and I'm about to take ordination exams. I was born in western part of Ukraine, a former Polish territory. And in 1988, back when it was still Soviet Union, and for the last 12 years, I've lived in Poland, and I've worked with an organization called European Christian Mission. And for the last 6 years, I've been involved in the church planting process, working on setting up the first Presbyterian church in the history of beautiful city of Krakow.
That's a great story. I mean, you're quite young. Can you tell us a little bit what brought you to this point? It's a kind of unusual church planting methodology, how an unordained young novice ends up as the senior church planter in a city of Krakow and starting from virtually nothing. Just give us a story of how you came to be in Krakow.
Yeah. So when I moved to Poland, and Poland and I have a very special relationship because I used to spend here an awful lot of time when I was a child. So I've always spoken the language and always have been bilingual. And when I went to Bible college in Ukraine after my high school, during the missiology course, I started thinking more about being involved in cross-cultural missions, and I was for a while. I was looking at the former Yugoslavia, the Baltic countries. Sorry, not Baltic, Balkan. And nothing was somehow all the doors for that were closed. And then I came across some of the statistics of the situation of the Protestant church in Poland, and just started thinking about that and started comparing that to the Ukrainian statistics, and the difference was just vast. And I started thinking about Poland, which has always been second home. I started thinking about Poland as a potential mission field, and that's when things got different for me and changed, and I felt the calling to work in Poland as a missionary. So that's how it started. And then I started in a small town in Poland with a couple that have been there working with my mission organization for a really long time. I started with them, worked there for 3 years, and then moved to Krakow because I felt called to urban ministries, and that would have been my experience from my time in Ukraine, and Krakow just seemed to be a good fit because it had very few churches. It's the center of Catholicism in Poland, and I already knew people here. I knew about the need, and I had friends here that were like-minded, and similarly, like myself, thought that Krakow needed a good, sound church.
Okay, so day one, what did you do?
Oh, I don't even know if there is a day one. It was a period of time. Well, maybe there is one.
Did you do
Day
like
one would have, if there is a, sorry?
Did you do like pre-planned before you did your first public service, worship service? What did
Yes.
you do?
Well, I suppose it all started with actually with City to City. There was a couple that works for City to City, Redeemer City to City, and they came to Krakow and they were trying to identify some church planting work that City to City could maybe help with. And I met with that couple and just started talking about what the church in Poland should look like, what the church for Krakow should look like. And I'm describing the whole philosophy of ministry and strategy and even worship, and they're asking me this question: why don't you lead a church plant? Why don't you start?
What were you at that point?
I must have been. I'm 33 now. 7 years ago. 25, yeah. 26. So and I was like, no, I'm not doing this. I'm too young. I'm lacking training. I can't do this. I would love to join somebody. I would love to join a team that's already doing this. But I'm not taking this responsibility, huge responsibility. But somehow over the next couple of months, the whole fear of failing, I suppose, just disappeared. And I started talking to friends about this. And suddenly a team of 10 people were there that were saying, okay, we want to do this with you. We would love to help you. So that was a sign for me. And for the Polish context, for the Polish reality, 10 people is your core group. That's as good as it's going to get.
It's a mega church, and
yes, that's how it felt, and so.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the UK and in Scotland, we'd be okay. A core group's typically 10 to 15 people. Yeah. Okay, can you tell us a little bit about Poland? I think a lot of the listeners will be very interested in the spiritual condition of Poland. I've been there. I've been in your church. Is it secular? Is it Catholic? Is it imperialistic? How's it been as it's emerged out of communism?
Yeah, it's a very unique period of time. I don't think Poland has ever had anything like this. So naturally, historically, it's been a very Catholic country where everybody, was Catholic. We had a very interesting period in the 16th century when the Reformed movement was growing, and it was massive, mainly due to the fact that the noblemen wanted to move away from the Catholic Church and its influence and its power. So they were planting and setting up Reformed churches, because that's where they immediately would become elders, and now it's them in charge. So there were hundreds just in our area here in southern Poland. There was at least over 200 Reformed churches in the 16th century. Now we are the only one in the radius of 200 miles. And then Counter-Reformation undid everything, clearly. And during the communism, the Catholic Church was viewed as this big hero because it was against the regime, it was against communism, and it was the church where all the national values and where that whole Polishness was being cultivated and celebrated and passed on from generation to generation. And then the new times have come after communism. a new generation came around that doesn't remember the Catholic Church as the big hero, and a new generation that was raised on Hollywood films and is now being raised by Netflix and the like. The religion is now, and the Catholic Church is viewed as something terrible, something bad. And what the leftist media are doing is they would never waste an opportunity to highlight another, yet another scandal in the Catholic Church, because for them that just shows any church in a bad light, and it's part of their agenda. That's what they're doing. So at the minute, the society is extremely polarized. You have the older generation that's still Catholic, devout. They know why they're Catholic. They would know oftentimes they would know their doctrines and beliefs, and they know why they believe that. Oftentimes, obviously, there's just a lot of cultural Christianity, cultural Catholicism. But then the younger generation is super secular, and it's getting more and more secular with every day, and the society is just splitting. And I think the last presidential elections have shown that in Poland, where our current president won with like 51%, and he represents the right-wing conservative government that backs up obviously the Catholic Church. And so yeah, we're in a very interesting position. And now the Catholic Church still has this big influence. I'm sure Poland has been even on the British news about making abortion laws stricter. Probably we're the only country in the EU that does that. And that causes a lot of riots, and again, among young people. During the worst of the pandemic last autumn, thousands of people were in the streets protesting against the new abortion laws because they don't agree with them. The law only stated what our constitution states at the minute. If somebody is disabled, you should not be discriminating him or her just based on that fact. So if you know that the unborn child in mother's womb is disabled, you know that before the birth, you should not be discriminating that child simply based on that fact. So the court only, the Constitutional Court only repeated what's already said in the Constitution. And that caused massive riots, and it's the Catholic Church that's viewed as the reason and the drive behind all of these changes, because obviously it goes well with the Catholic beliefs and practices, and people just view the Catholic Church as this big evil monster, and a lot of that falls on us Protestants as well, because a lot of people just write off religion, any kind of religion, and any kind of faith, and even just belief in God. So, but there's also a percentage of people that are interested in alternative churches and now start looking for Protestant churches. We've had a few people. We have a few people who joined because of that. We have, and we constantly have people visiting our services, trying to see what we are like, what we're about. And we have a lot of people that hope that we are liberal and that we are not like the Catholic Church. And they come in, they sit through the service, they hear the sermon, they never come back. So there's a lot of that.
Can I talk a little bit about how you engage with people? I'm especially interested in, given that there's a background Roman Catholic population. I've been at your service, and what approach would you take? On the one hand, you could have elements in the service that Catholics would not be uncomfortable with. So the clergy could have a clerical collar. You could have a degree of liturgy, one or two candles, around the side. So that's one approach. The other approach is, no, we're just going to go totally, we're going to wear flip-flops, a Hawaiian shirt, shorts, just non-Catholic. Tell me a little bit about your thinking, what approach you would take.
I did a lot of that thinking before we launched our very first service, because we had to make these decisions. We had to decide, okay, what kind of church are we going to be when it comes to Sunday worship? And where do I start? So there is already a bigger group of Christians in Poland that are doing the whole Hawaiian shirts and shorts during the service. Most evangelical churches would be like that, and I can say that it's somehow attracting people. Maybe certain percentage of Catholics that are so tired of the strict and orchestrated liturgy that the Catholic Church would have, they just flee from that, and they flee to this other extreme where the worship service is completely spontaneous, not planned even. And maybe to some people it's appealing. At the time, before we started, I noticed that the Lutheran Church in Poland was receiving quite a few converts, and I think that number is only growing. There are different kinds of Lutheran churches in the country. Again, the whole spectrum from conservative, sound, theologically to extremely liberal, which was the case of our Krakow congregation here, and the Lutheran congregation, I mean, and I noticed that for a lot of Catholics, that transition from Catholicism to high Lutheran Church is easier to make because of certain liturgical elements that are present there. So that was part of our thinking, part of our design or development of our liturgy. So we thought that we would decrease the gap between Catholics, and again, even if people are not religious in Poland, they still have a certain idea of what worship should look like, and the only idea that they have comes from the Catholic Church, because that's all they've seen. There are very few Protestant churches. An average Pole has never been to a Protestant worship service anyway, so all they know is the Catholic Mass. So we thought that for us, the best way to go would be going back to our Reformed historic worship that did have liturgical elements, things like you recite the creed every Sunday, there is a confession of sins, and the absolution read every service. There is a responsive psalm being read. There are other responsive elements. The Lord's Prayer is being recited. These things are something that an average Catholic already knows and could identify with, and they are something, and it's something that's historically Reformed for us, and it's something that's I think is sound and right to do in worship. So that's the approach we took. So we are slightly more liturgical probably than an average Presbyterian church in the UK, I would imagine. It's interesting when when evangelicals come and visit our service, they sit through the service, and they approach me after the service and they say, "This is so stiff. This is so boring. This is Catholic. This is basically Catholic." And then a Catholic comes in for the first time, sits through the service, and comes to me after the service and goes, "Wow, this is so different from what I'm used to. This is so different from our Catholic Mass. There's humor during the service. There is this freedom and spontaneous things. We never have that in our church." So it depends on your perspective. Evangelicals don't like our approach because, as I said, they are, at least evangelicals in Poland, they are a reaction. The reason they are evangelicals is because they reacted oftentimes to the Catholic Church. Maybe I'm just simplifying it, oversimplifying it. But
a really interesting terminology there. I find it fascinating. You spoke about Catholics, evangelicals, and Presbyterians. That is really interesting. So would you tend to use Presbyterian as a category to differentiate from evangelical? And tell me a little bit, what is evangelical as a brand in Poland? Is it?
Very interesting and funny you should ask that, because it's a bit easier in Polish because there are actually two words for evangelical. And I'll just say them to you in Polish, okay? And I'll explain the difference after that. So the first one is ewangelicki, and the other one is ewangeliczny. So the ending is a little bit different. The first one is mainline Protestant denominations, and there are three. Historically, it's been three churches in the country: Lutherans, the Reformed, and Methodists. So all the baby baptizing denominations, and that's the term that we would use to, when we describe ourselves, and that's the official name in our church. That's how we registered as well as Presbyterians. So we've added the fourth branch there, and then all the other groups, neo-Protestant, or the way you would understand them as you say in English, evangelical, all the denominations that came later, Baptists or Pentecostals, charismatics. That's the other word that we use, and it is a brand kind of in Poland. It's so small that it's invisible, but obviously it's a movement. It has a few dozen thousand people in it, so it did create its own style and brand. But that's the brand that we're trying to stay away from, because it's just it's usually very shallow theologically, and culturally, oftentimes even inappropriate. But
I think that's fascinating. I have friends, for example, in Latin America, and they would be unhappy with the term evangelical. Presbyterian, bizarrely, carries a lot more weight, whereas I guess in Scotland, folk are largely ignorant about it. So I think the perception of what an evangelical is, especially in a post-Trump era, is really, complex, and it's if I can keep using this phrase, brand that we've really got to be careful about in using. Another thing that fascinates me is, how would you engage an average Pole with a gospel conversation? I mean, one thing that sticks in my mind is that you and I were in an Uber in Edinburgh, and you'll remember this. The driver was Polish. He was from Krakow. I was in front, you were in the back, and I'm asking him all these questions. Wow, where what do you do? Where do you come from? Where do you study? All this stuff, and you were in the back, silent. And I'm thinking, this guy's rude. This guy's from Krakow, and you're not engaging. So the Scottish way is question, question, question. The Polish way is not. So I'm thinking, number one, tell me, what does that say about your culture, and how do you engage folk in a culture that just doesn't like questions?
Yeah, see, cultures are funny, because if anyone was being rude in that taxi, it was you. Because
no, Scottish perspective.
It's fine. I'm sure the taxi driver is used to the culture that he's living in, but that's not how he. And you remember, he wasn't answering back. He would only give you short answers, and he would never ask you a question back, and he would just stop talking as soon as he was done with his answer. It's just, I don't know where it comes from. It's not easy. It doesn't help in church planting, but there's no such thing as small talk, really. In this, it's not just Polish culture; it's Slavic, Eastern European cultures. You don't engage in conversations with people you don't know. Maybe it's partly due to the communism, our communist past, where you couldn't trust people and you didn't know who you're actually talking to, so you had to be careful with what you're saying. But yeah, it doesn't help. My wife and I, we 6 months ago, we moved into a brand new block of flats. We finally were able to get a mortgage last year, so we renovated it and we moved in. 6 months later, Ania made a cake or something, or biscuits. I can't remember what it was, and it was just a few Sundays ago. And after church, we knocked on our neighbor's door, and I knew that a few days earlier he had picked up a parcel for me that the courier brought, and I wasn't at home, so I asked the courier to try leaving it with the neighbors, and he did. So I went to go pick up my books, but also to say hello and introduce myself, because 6 months later. Now, they, in fairness, they did move in later than us, but so we were doing this Hollywood thing, or maybe I don't know, maybe you do that in Britain. I'm not sure. We're standing with this plate in front of the door. The guy opens the door, already is holding my package in his hands, hands that to me. And Ania, my wife, she's trying to offer him the cake, and she says, well, we just wanted to meet you because you're our neighbors. Hello, and the guy goes, yeah, hi. Well, but no need for the cake. It's okay. Seriously, we offered it a few times. He refused. He didn't take the cake. He did not invite us in. Ania goes, maybe we should. I hope my neighbors are not listening to this, but anyway, Ania says, maybe one time you could come over to our place for coffee. And he goes, yeah, sure, maybe. And we just got back home with that plate in our hands. And, he could have taken it, binned it, and just returned the plate. But yeah, so these things, it takes time to build trust. It doesn't come easy. People are very careful with their relationships, with whom they let into their inner circle of friends, and it's very hard to break through that. But once you do, things get better.
Yeah, I'll have to take you in a taxi drive in the city of Glasgow, and the driver will have your life story by the end of the taxi run.
I'd much rather work with that.
Yeah. So tell us how the church is going. What are your encouragements? What are your joys, and what are your challenges?
Yeah, it's a very unique time for us. Our attendance over the pandemic has tripled. And
wow,
it tripled. It's the opposite.
Are you online, by the way, or are you physical?
Sorry?
Are you online just now, or have you gone back to person?
No. We only were online for like 6 weeks, 6 Sundays, I think, when it first started. Spring. When did it start? Spring 2020, was it? Yeah. So when nobody knew what this was, and when the police cars were, driving around the city telling everybody to stay at home. So we did that. But again, see, this is where it's great to have such a strong and influential Catholic Church in the country, because they were pushing the government to reopen places of worship, and churches were reopened before shopping centers, shopping malls were. So and we benefited from that. So we only had like a 6 week break where we were online. For a while, we had when the restrictions got worse. Not this Christmas, but Christmas of 2021. For almost half a year, we went with 2 services actually, because of the limits and regulations that we had, which wasn't helpful, because you have from between 10 and 15 people on each service, and it just doesn't help in building your congregation and your fellowship. Especially if you're trying to plant the church to start. So yeah, I don't know what it is, but we have quite a few of the church consists mainly of young families, young professionals. For a really long period of time, I was the oldest person in the church, being 32 or 33. Thankfully, that's not the case anymore. But it's a lot of people that have graduated, just graduated, or are maybe still in college, and people that have just started families, just got married, or just had babies. Until the first lockdowns, we were a group of just young adults with no children. And then the first children were born during the first lockdowns, actually. So that's when we moved our services from the evening time, because for a number of years we were meeting in a Methodist church on Sunday evenings. We rented a place where I'm at the minute, and we moved our worship services here, and we have like a ministry center that's open during the week. Anybody can drop in. We have a library that you can use. We moved our worship services to mornings because we knew that as soon as the first children come, we will have to do that. And the Lord has been bringing more people, and it seems to be. I think we are already we've already outgrown the place where we are meeting at the minute. So we'll be soon looking for another meeting space for our Sundays.
And we're talking here about 30, 40 people now.
We're talking 30, 35 people.
Yeah, I mean, when I was with you, I think there was maybe 15 people. So that's tremendous.
Then it dropped, and then for a while, and then and now I would say we're between 30 and 35 on Sunday.
That's good. Now, I think over here in Scotland, we're really interested in the Ukrainian situation. You're obviously a Ukrainian native. There's a real connection between Poland and Ukraine. Tell us what the atmosphere is like. Are folk edgy, frightened? Is this impacting kind of spiritual temperature?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I see more panic on the Western side than on the Ukrainian side. One thing to remember here is that Ukraine has been at war with Russia from at least 2014, I think, from the time when Russia just annexed Crimea. When you have the history that you do, and when you have Russia as your next door neighbor, you're kind of used to these things. And yes, it's a constant threat. You live under a constant bully. You never know what to expect. And over the time, you just get used to kind of that thought, and you get used to living with this idea. And I can see that the West is more anxious than the Ukrainians, and even some of my Ukrainian friends that are living like 20 kilometers away from the Russian border. There's a big Presbyterian church in Krakow, right on the largest city in eastern Ukraine, very close to the Russian border. They just carry on with the ministry, with the work, and with life. And I did hear some ideas that people that live in eastern Ukraine, they were saying that as soon as it starts, we're going to move to western Ukraine. There were rumors of American embassy being moved from Kiev to Lviv to western Ukraine. But certainly the fact that all the embassy and non-essential workers were advised to leave, that doesn't help. And it only creates more and more panic. There is really no way of knowing what's going to happen, because everything is in one person's head, and it's going to be a one-man decision. And it's possible that not even his closest circles know what he's plotting. So we're just praying for peace, and praying for this not to affect, for this not to start, and not to affect the innocent lives of civil, peaceful people.
Now, our listeners, again, will be really interested to hear more about the church. Can you tell us the name of your church, if folk want to Google it?
Sure. It's called Christ the Saviour Presbyterian Church.
And if folk Google that, they will get to you.
Sure. Yeah. Our website is bilingual. It's in Polish and in English, so you should be able to do that. Our worship services are also bilingual. If people visit from Scotland, you can come and join us for worship on Sunday.
Yeah, and I guess you're not self-supporting yet financially, so you are open to contributions.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah, we are. That's the goal, and that's where we're going, but we're not there yet.
Okay. Before we go, Tell me a little bit about another little ministry you've got. You're doing some publishing. Just give us an update on where that's going.
Sure. That's publishing ministry is something that we started 5 years ago, and it's certainly the ministry that has surprised me the most. I think part of our growth is actually due to our publishing, due to the fact that we are publishing the authors that we publish. We've done over 20 titles now, and we're working on at least another 20. Some of the authors that we have translated into Polish are R.C. Sproul, Timothy Keller, Kevin DeYoung, and we are also translating Calvin's Institutes at the minute. Book 1 and 2 are about to go out to be printed. We need just maybe a few more weeks to just make sure that there's no typos and the book is ready for printing. And we also have big ambitions. We want to produce the first study Bible in Polish. And that's something that we are still working on. We are looking at different options, but it's probably too early to be saying anything about
what this. I mean, we talk about this all the time in cross-cultural mission. It's great for you to have translations of Sproul, Keller, and all that stuff. Yeah. We know we've hit the sweet spot when you guys start writing your own stuff.
Absolutely.
Is there evidence of that?
There not yet, but there are prospects of that. There's hope for that. There are names, there are people that we are already even kind of trying to encourage. A few of them are still working on their PhDs or are busy with their maybe another degree, yet another degree that they are getting. But it's certainly something that we would love to do, because I understand it. It should be, if we continue translating foreign things, the ideas in the books that we will publish will remain foreign to the people we're trying to reach. So that's certainly not the.
I guess you're still quite a young church yet, but you're praying for your own theologians, your own seminaries. Do you have a seminary in Poland at the moment?
No, that's another thing we are praying for, and actually something that we've started talking to the Reformed Church about. In fact, it was the Reformed Church of Poland that approached us about this. There are good models for this. We've seen that in Ukraine, for example, where the Presbyterians and the Reformed have one seminary that trains ministers for both denominations. And that's something that we hope to do. At the minute, if everybody has to go and study abroad. I studied in Kiev, or another thing you could do, and that's what the Reformed ministers have been doing. You would go through the Lutheran College in Warsaw, and then you could be ordained. Maybe you take extra courses or on Reformed theology, but we would love to have our own training course in our own seminary.
Sashko, we'll come to the end of our time. That's been fascinating. I do hope our listeners will Google the church, will take a real interest in Poland. We'll pray for Poland. It is not a long way away. You can get a really cheap flight, go to Krakow, watch out for the trumpeter every day, have a coffee in a lovely square. It's just an absolutely beautiful city, and I would recommend that. Sashko, thank you for giving us your time today, and we wish you every blessing.
Thank you so much, David.
And Generation listeners, thank you for staying with us. Keep on our podcast, keep listening, tell other people about it. We hope to invest a little bit in some decent recording equipment to make this even more special. We'll be giving you more details, hopefully in the next few months. We'd like to maybe raise £2,000-3,000 just to do that. The listenership, the audience is growing, and we want to be a good resource. Generation podcast, it's a missional podcast from Scotland with a kind of Scottish accent and perspective, but with a worldwide interest in vision. Thank you for being with us today, and wherever you are, have a great day.